This is one of the most fantastic finds of all time when it comes to biblical archaeology. This is the burial box of Caiaphas, the high priest who sentenced Jesus to die. You can see how ornate it is. And on the side of this box, it identifies the remains as the remains of Joseph, son of Caiaphas.
This ate in the records of religious history. Few figures are as controversial as Caiaphas, a Jewish high priest who played a role in the judgment and crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Imagine for a moment that this man who played a key role in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ left behind a hidden testament. A testament that reveals terrifying secrets he knew about Jesus and could alter our understanding of history and faith. Recently, a testament attributed to Caiaphas has surfaced.
Caiaphas, he wasn't a real person, and then they discovered his bone box, his ossuary. Inside they found the remains of a 50-year-old man who lived 2,000 years ago,
revealing troubling insights of his thoughts about Jesus and actions during that period. But what exactly did Caiaphas reveal, and why is it so terrifying? Join us as we dive into the heart of this mystery and unravel what Caiaphas disclosed about Jesus in his final testament. The discovery and the authentication of Caiaphas' last testament. The story of how Caiaphas' last testament was discovered is a bit impressive, to say the least. The manuscript was found in a chamber beneath an ancient synagogue in Jerusalem, a site that can be traced back to high priestly clans from the Second Temple period. It was written in the common language back then, Aramaic language, and was on parchment scrolls. When scholars and archaeologists first saw this manuscript that contains the last testament of Caiaphas, they were skeptical and thought it could be a forgery. Several language analyses and intense carbon dating tests were carried out, and the result revealed the manuscript dates back to the early 1st century AD. This proves its authenticity. It was stated that if this is truly the last testament of Caiaphas, then it represents a monumental discovery in the biblical archaeology field. The initial translations revealed Caiaphas' thoughts, theological ideas, and, most shockingly, his account of meeting Jesus and his followers. These revelations could turn everything we know on its head and reshape our understanding. But what's in this testament? Let's find out. Caiaphas' testament gives us a peek into his interactions with Jesus. Contrary to the rigid, unyielding figure we see in the Gospels, Caiaphas comes across as a conflicted guy.
Ananias and Caiaphas were the high priests at the time during the period of Jesus' crucifixion. The leadership of the Jews brought Jesus to them first before turning him over to the Romans.
He describes Jesus as a charismatic and compelling figure, someone whose teachings made an impact that, in some ways, resonated with many, including some members of the Sanhedrin. Caiaphas talks about several meetings with Jesus where they debated religious law and theology. These discussions apparently left a mark on him, making him question the established order. This adds a whole new layer to our understanding of Caiaphas. He wasn't just a one-dimensional villain, he was a man wrestling with his beliefs. One of the most terrifying revelations in the testament of Caiaphas, he claims that he had a vision after Jesus' death. In this vision, he saw a resurrected Jesus who predicted the destruction of the temple and foretold the suffering that would hit Jerusalem. This vision haunted Caiaphas, making him believe he had made a colossal mistake in condemning Jesus. The contents of this testament are bound to spark some heated theological debates. If Caiaphas doubted his actions and saw visions of a resurrected Jesus, this could have massive implications for both Jewish and Christian traditions. For Christians, the testament provides additional evidence of Jesus' resurrection and his divine nature. For Jews, it challenges the traditional narrative of the high priesthood and its role in the events of the Passion. The testament raises questions about the nature of religious authority and the struggle between maintaining tradition and embracing new revelations. Caiaphas' internal conflict mirrors the struggle between sticking to tradition and embracing new revelations, a theme that's played out in religions throughout history. The significance of this testament goes beyond theology.
Theology is the study and exploration of religious beliefs and the nature of God. It involves critical reflection on matters of faith, including the interpretation of scripture, doctrine, and moral principles.
It provides a rare glimpse into the mindset of the Jewish leadership during a time of great turmoil and change. Caiaphas's reflections on Roman rule, Jewish unrest, and his interactions with key figures add a new dimension to our understanding of that time. Caiaphas emerges as a more complex character, often portrayed as a villain, a man caught between his duty as a high priest and his doubts and fears. This humanizes him, challenging us to reconsider our judgments of historical figures and appreciate the complexity of their situations. But if we must fully understand the significance of Caiaphas's last testament, we must first look into the historical context in which he lived. The historical context of Caiaphas and Jesus. Judea, the kingdom in which Jerusalem sat as the capital, was under the Roman Empire's control. Now, the Jews had a pretty complex relationship with Rome. Sure, they were under Roman control, but they still held on to their own beliefs and traditions. Judaism was the dominant religion, with a complex system of laws and beliefs. The Jewish people were divided based on their response to the Romans' rule, with some accepting it and others resisting it. This was a chaotic time in Jewish history, with the Romans' rule that caused a lot of tension. This period wasn't exactly a calm situation, as the Roman administration was often harsh, leading to frequent unrest and revolts of the people. The citizens of Judea, who were under the Romans' rule, were forced to pay substantial taxes and generally felt oppressed about it. Life for ordinary people was often difficult, marked by poverty, disease, and injustice. There was a significant gap between the wealthy and the poor. The expectation of a Messiah was widely spread among the Jewish people.
Jews believe Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is reported to have performed miracles of healing the sick and feeding the hungry. By all Christian gospel accounts, Jesus was buried, then rose from the dead 3 days later to ascend into heaven as the Messiah of all mankind.
Which was a big deal of hope that kept the people going during those tough times. They were waiting for the Messiah, a special leader who would free them from the Romans' dominance and restore their kingdom. The Jewish society was divided into different groups, including Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots, each with their interpretations of the law, that is, the Torah, and beliefs about the Messiah. The Pharisees, known for their strict adherence to the Torah and oral traditions, believed in the resurrection of the dead and the existence of angels. On the contrary to the Pharisees, the Sadducees were a more conservative group, majorly composed of the priestly and aristocratic classes. They rejected oral traditions and did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. Then, the Essenes, a monastic group that lived in isolated communities such as Qumran, practiced strict purity laws. Now, the Zealots were a revolutionary group of people that sought to overthrow the Roman government through violent means. Herod was the king of Judea appointed by the Romans. And even though his rule was also marked by paranoia and brutality, including the execution of several of his family members, he was known for his extensive building projects, including the expansion of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, which was the center of Jewish religious life. The high priests, who were appointed by the Romans, held significant power in the society, such as the likes of Caiaphas. Joseph Caiaphas, who was a Sadducee, served as the high priest of the temple in Jerusalem from AD 18 to AD 36. As the high priest, Caiaphas had significant religious duties, including overseeing temple activities and rituals, especially during important festivals like Passover. But his role was not just religious, it was deeply political. The high priest had to ensure that Jewish society remained stable and that no actions taken by the Jewish population would provoke the wrath of Rome. According to the biblical Gospels, around 27 to 29 CE, Jesus of Nazareth's ministry emerged.
Did you know that Jesus grew up in the small town of Nazareth, which had a reputation of being poor?
He preached a message of love, forgiveness, and the coming of the kingdom of God. His teachings attracted a large following, particularly among the poor and disenfranchised. Jesus also performed miracles, which further cemented his status as a prophet and possibly the Messiah in the eyes of his followers. His entry into Jerusalem, celebrated today as Palm Sunday, was a bold public declaration that he was a significant figure, perhaps even the awaited Savior. This event alone would have caught the attention of both the Jewish authorities and the Roman rulers. Caiaphas and the Jewish leaders were wary of Jesus for several reasons. First, his growing popularity threatened their authority. Jesus often criticized the religious leaders of the time, accusing them of hypocrisy and corruption. This was not just a spiritual critique, but a direct challenge to their power and legitimacy. Second, there was a political threat. Any large movement, especially one proclaiming the arrival of a new kingdom, was seen as a potential spark for rebellion. The last thing Caiaphas wanted was to give the Roman authorities a reason to crack down on the Jewish population. If Jesus' followers got out of hand, it could lead to severe repercussions from Rome. Was Caiaphas just a power-driven individual who was jealous of Jesus, or was he just trying to maintain order to the Jewish tradition? For these reasons, Caiaphas, who was a Sadducee and didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead, and the Sanhedrin, otherwise known as the Jewish Council, saw Jesus as a major threat, and they decisively concluded he had to be gotten rid of. These tensions ended in the arrest and trial of Jesus. According to the Gospels, Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane after the Last Supper, a meal he shared with his disciples to celebrate Passover. He was brought before the Sanhedrin, where Caiaphas and other Jewish leaders questioned him. The charges against Jesus were primarily religious blasphemy for claiming to be the Son of God. However, underlying these charges was the fear of political instability. By claiming a divine kingship, Jesus was seen as a potential insurrectionist. The Sanhedrin found Jesus guilty and brought him before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. Here, the charges shifted more to a political angle, that he was claiming to be the king of the Jews, which was very much against Rome. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, found himself in a tricky position. He could see that Jesus did not pose a real political threat to Rome, but he was also aware of the precarious balance of power in Judea. Pilate initially tried to avoid condemning Jesus, offering to release him as part of a Passover amnesty tradition. However, the crowd, influenced by the Jewish leaders, demanded Jesus' crucifixion. Reluctantly, Pilate agreed to the execution to maintain peace and order. Jesus was flogged, mocked, and crucified.
Naturally, the most famous character sacrificed on the cross was Jesus Christ. Strangely enough, his instrument of death ended up becoming the symbol of the religion founded by his followers.
A common Roman method of execution reserved for the worst criminals and insurrectionists. The crucifixion of Jesus had profound and lasting impacts. For Christians, it became the central event of their faith, symbolizing Jesus' sacrifice for humanity's sins and his resurrection as proof of his divine nature. For Caiaphas and the Jewish authorities, it was a temporary solution to a perceived threat, though it certainly didn't end the Christian movement. The resurrection of Jesus, as proclaimed by his followers, led to the rapid spread of Christianity. Within a few decades, the message of Jesus had spread throughout the Roman Empire and beyond, fundamentally altering the course of history. As for Caiaphas, he remained a high priest for several more years. Historically, he is often portrayed as a villain, the man who condemned Jesus to death. However, understanding the complex historical context helps us see him as a figure trying to navigate incredibly difficult political and social pressures. Caiaphas was doing what he believed was necessary to maintain order and protect his people from Roman retribution. His actions, while harsh, were in line with the responsibilities of his position. He was a man caught between the demands of an occupying power and the fervent expectations of his people. However, not everyone sees it this way. In fact, the release of Caiaphas' testament has created a storm of reactions through both academic and religious communities. We'll be taking a look at a few of them over the next few minutes. The reaction to the testament. Reactions have been mixed, with some excited about the discovery, while others are skeptical about its authenticity and implications. Many of them saw this testament as a goldmine, offering a rare glimpse into the mind of a key historical figure during one of the most important events in human history. For decades, Caiaphas had been somewhat of an enigma, a powerful high priest whose motives and thoughts were largely a mystery. This testament suddenly made him more relatable and more human. But not all reactions were positive. Some scholars were skeptical, questioning the authenticity of the document and the veracity of Caiaphas's terrifying visions. But whether you believe in supernatural elements or not, there's no denying that this discovery has sparked a fascinating dialogue about the intersection of history, faith, and human psychology. Leading biblical scholars are calling for a more thorough examination and analysis of the manuscript and its contents. Conferences are being set up to discuss the Testament and its potential impact on our understanding of early Christian and Jewish history. Meanwhile, religious leaders are grappling with the theological ramifications and figuring out how to address this in their teachings. Some theologians embrace the Testament as evidence of a higher plan. They argued that Caiaphas's visions were a form of divine retribution, or a prophetic insight meant to underscore the importance of Jesus' sacrifice. This perspective suggested that even those who opposed Jesus played a role in a grand divine scheme. On the other hand, more skeptical theologians cautioned against taking the visions at face value. They pointed out that historical documents often contain elements of myth and exaggeration. These scholars suggested that Caiaphas's testament might be more about the high priest's guilt and fear rather than actual prophetic visions. Public reaction has equally been mixed too. Some see the testament as a confirmation of their faith, others view it as a challenge. The media is all over it, with headlines talking about a potential religious revolution sparked by Caiaphas's revelations. As news of the Testament spread, it didn't take long for the public and media to catch wind of the story. Social media platforms lit up with debates, theories, and reactions from people all over the world. Some saw the Testament as a fascinating historical artifact, while others viewed it through a more spiritual or conspiratorial lens. Media outlets were quick to capitalize on the story, with headlines ranging from the sensational to the scholarly.
And then there was Caiaphas. Caiaphas was a religious leader. He was the high priest, and he was filled with pride and coldness. He was crafty and shrewd, and the cross condemned him.
Documentaries and news segments delved into the discovery, often featuring interviews with experts who provided various interpretations of Caiaphas's words. The media frenzy brought the story to a global audience, sparking interest and debate among people who might not usually engage with historical or theological topics. For many, the Testament became a symbol of the ongoing quest for truth. It reminded us that history is full of surprises and that our understanding of the past is always evolving. This sense of discovery and the potential for new knowledge captivated the public's imagination. If Caiaphas's last testament is true, it would represent one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of our time. It could change everything we know about Jesus' judgment and crucifixion, offering new insights into the mind of the man at the center of it all. Within academic circles, Caiaphas's testament has sparked intense debate. Historians and archaeologists have scrutinized the document, debating its authenticity, origin, and implications. While the majority of experts agree that the Testament is a genuine artifact from the 1st century CE, there is still significant disagreement about how to interpret its contents. Some scholars argue that Caiaphas's visions should be understood as metaphorical or psychological rather than literal. They suggest that the high priest, grappling with his conscience, might have experienced these visions as manifestations of his guilt and fear. This interpretation frames the Testament as a deeply personal document, revealing the inner battles of a man who played a major role in a world-changing event. Others take a more literal approach, viewing the visions as actual prophetic experiences. This perspective aligns more closely with religious interpretations and suggests that Caiaphas was, in some way, privy to a greater cosmic plan. This camp often draws parallels with other historical figures who claimed to have had divine or prophetic experiences. For many believers, Caiaphas's testament has reinforced their faith, providing what they see as tangible evidence of divine intervention in human history. It has prompted renewed interest in biblical studies and led some to explore the historical context of their faith more deeply. Churches and religious institutions have also engaged with the Testament, incorporating discussions of its implications into sermons and study groups. On the flip side, the Testament has also sparked critical reflections among skeptics and non-believers. For some, the document serves as a reminder of the complexities and contradictions inherent in religious texts and historical records. It has encouraged a more critical examination of the sources of religious belief and how historical narratives are constructed. Now that we've dug into different and fascinating reactions to Caiaphas's testament, we must let you know that there's an even more interesting discovery ahead. The story takes another interesting turn when archaeologists unearthed a limestone ossuary in Jerusalem of Joseph Caiaphas himself. Not only do we have written records that shed light on his thoughts and actions, but we have also uncovered physical evidence that brings us closer to this crucial figure. We are about to explore the remarkable archaeological findings of Caiaphas's tomb and what it discloses about the man who played such an important role in one of history's most famous trials and events. Archaeological discoveries of Caiaphas. Other archaeological discoveries occurred during the 1990s, when some workers were digging around the Peace Forest area near Jerusalem, working on a road expansion project. Suddenly, they stumbled upon an ancient burial cave, and they quickly called in the experts from the Israel Antiquities Authority. When the archaeologists arrived, they found something incredible: 12 ossuaries, also called the bone boxes, from the 1st century CE. Among them, one stood out with an ornate design and an inscription that got everyone excited: Yehoseph bar Kapha, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. This made the find even more exciting because it connects directly to the high priest, Caiaphas. During the Second Temple period, Jewish burial customs involved placing the deceased in a tomb until the flesh decayed, then collecting the bones and putting them in a limestone box called an ossuary. This practice was especially common among the Jewish elite, who believed in bodily resurrection. The Caiaphas ossuary is particularly fancy, with intricate floral and geometric designs, suggesting it belonged to someone very important. The ossuary itself is a limestone box, about 37 centimeters high, 75 centimeters long, and 25 centimeters wide. The inscriptions are in Aramaic, which was the everyday language of the time. The decorations match other high-status burials from the era. Other ossuaries in the same cave had names that might be related to Caiaphas's family, adding more weight to the identification. Finding the Caiaphas ossuary is a big deal for both biblical archaeology and history. It is a physical piece of evidence that supports the existence of Caiaphas, a figure mentioned in the New Testament and by the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus. This helps bridge the gap between ancient texts and modern archaeology, giving us a clearer picture of the historical context. Of course, not everyone is convinced. Some scholars argue that Caiaphas might have been a more common name than we think, so the ossuary might not necessarily belong to the famous high priest. Others point out that there aren't additional inscriptions explicitly linking this ossuary to the high priest's office. Still, the combination of the name, the fancy design, and the archaeological context makes a pretty strong case. The Caiaphas ossuary is part of a larger collection of finds from the Second Temple period, which includes things like the Dead Sea Scrolls and artifacts from the Temple Mount. These discoveries together give us a richer understanding of Jewish life, religious practices, and the political scene under Roman rule. For Christians, this ossuary provides a tangible connection to the events of the Passion, grounding the gospel stories in real history. After its discovery, the ossuary was carefully documented and preserved by the IAA. It has been displayed in various museums, including the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. This lets both scholars and the public get up close to this remarkable piece of history, sparking further interest and study. The ossuary of Caiaphas is a fascinating find that brings us closer to understanding the world of first-century Judea. It connects the dots between ancient texts and physical evidence, offering insights into the lives and practices of the people of that time. Through ongoing research and preservation, this discovery continues to illuminate a crucial period in Jewish and Christian history, showing just how interconnected our past and present are. Do you think that Caiaphas was actually putting things in order, or was he just synced in his world of protecting his authoritative role? Share your thoughts in the comment section. Don't forget to like, follow, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click on the next video on your screen. You will enjoy it.